Hey everybody, this is my 40-gallon Black Ghost knife fish tank, and tonight I'm going to do a water change on it. We're going to get in there and do a little bit of maintenance. Not really sure what it's going to amount to just yet. This is kind of spur of the moment. I just threw the camera on the tripod and we're going to have at it. I know I need to trim the plants up a little bit. The cluster you can see sort of to the center right up there, growing all up to the top, is got, you know, scum growing at the surface, and we're gonna have to get in there and do a little bit of work cleaning that up. And it looks like the glass probably needs a little bit of a wiping down, and maybe we'll trim a few other things up, any little errant dead leaves or anything like that while we're in there. So while you go ahead and enjoy the look of the tank for a few moments, I'm gonna go ahead and get the siphon hose and we'll get started. Now I know I really should get in here and do a filter change too, but it's almost 8:30 already. I haven't fed anybody, I haven't had dinner myself, so we'll have to see how it goes. I'm probably not going to do it. I'm not really planning on doing a huge water change any way you slice it, so we're just going to get in here, get started. Let me get the water draining, I'll be right back. Now normally I will shut that's interesting. I'm not sure if that's my siphon hose or if that's the not sure what that was. I think it was the surface skimmer. If you can see that, it had a little dead snail shell that had floated up there, and the shell had gotten stuck against the surface skimmer. So what I was getting ready to say was I don't normally have to turn the filter off on this tank. Let me do that right now though. Normally, for whatever reason, this tank doesn't draw air down through that surface skimmer most of the time. And when the water dips down below the surface skimmer as the tank's draining, I never really have an issue with it. I just let the filter keep running, and I never have to worry about shutting it down or turning it off or repriming it or anything. And then, of course, right today, as I was getting ready to say that's what's going to happen, it started sucking air through that surface skimmer. So I'm not really sure what's going on with that. Well, I can feel how rough the glass is. It's got a lot of that green spot algae on it. It's coming off fairly easily though. I suppose before we get too far into it, I need to get the plants trimmed. It's tough to trim the plants, like all this stuff in here. Once that has, it doesn't have the water to support it anymore, you don't know what it looks like and how it sits in the tank, and you know where the leaves sit and that sort of stuff, once it's sort of collapsed in on itself as you drain the water. So if you're going to get in there and trim plants, it's usually advisable to do that while the water is either full or pretty close to it. It gives you a better idea of what you're, you know, looking at in real time. So I probably ought to get the gravel vac in here and get some of this stuff out. This is that weird other plant that I don't know what it is that grows around in the tank, that green stuff, and then this of course is dead leaves. And I got a bucket over here for just such kind of stuff. So I'll let that other stuff float around and do its thing. I guess we can get in here and try to gravel back a little. This siphon hose is more of a water changer siphon hose. Not really much in the way of gravel backing. And I got little Princess Sassafras is peeking up from behind the box there on the floor. So she's probably in here playing with Squeaker. If I'm seeing her, we're probably going to be hearing him here in the fairly near future. So let me pause on the glass. It's clear enough that you can see through there. I don't need to clear the glass away just so you can see into the tank. So the first thing I want to do is I want to get some of these mats of green scum that have been floating on the surface. It comes off in sheets. Well, now it's on the floor. That's pretty gross. Hang on half a second here. Cover that. Then we'll put that in the bucket where it belongs. So that looks like a little dead piece of shrimp that I put in there yesterday for food that nobody ate. And that looks like another dead snail shell. It's a good sized snail shell there. This green mass here that looks like a brain is that weird stuff that I don't know what it is. I don't remember putting it in the tank. It just got in there. And then all this new growth, I'm just going to go ahead and pull these entire fronds off and remove these altogether. We can save those. Some of this stuff is just covered in that nasty stuff, and we'll get rid of that altogether. This, for example, doesn't belong there. I don't know how it really got there, but it looks like it's been there for a while, so we'll go ahead and save that. But I want to rinse that off before I put it back in the tank. It's got that dark green scummy stuff growing on it. So we got tons and tons of new growth and offshoots and stuff coming in back here. It's getting really thick. So I'm probably going to have to get in there and pull some of this out altogether. I just don't know if that's going to be tonight. So don't forget, I've always got Java Fern and Water Sprite for sale. I'll put my email down below as usual. So if you're interested, hit me up. Right now I've obviously got tons of Java Fern. I've always got lots of Water Sprite. Usually got Java Fern too. That's usually not a problem. I'm not even talking about what I'm pulling out of here right now. I've got buckets of it in the other room. I've still got those huge masses. If anybody's interested, if anybody wants a giant pre-grown mass of Water Sprite that's the size of a basketball, let me know. I will sell them intact. I'll have to make other arrangements when it comes to shipping since they're so big. See, that was a big cluster of young Java Fern floating in the back of the tank. So I'd have to, do some other sort of shipping than I normally do just because of the size of the masses of Java Fern. But we'll work it out if you're interested. So I think I'm going to leave that intact. That's mostly just Java, and it's just growing on this stick like I want it to. It's a little bit too much up towards the top of the tank, and it is going to need to be thinned out at some point. It's getting a little out of control, but the dead stuff has been pulled out of it. I got a bunch of the little babies and stuff off of it that we needed to get out of there to thin it out. So that'll look better once the tank fills back up. We're not going to get make a lot of progress in the way as far as vacuuming the tank and getting all the stuff out of it. I really need to do a filter change. Once we get it up and running again, the filter will draw a lot of this waterborne, all the stuff that's swirling around. That'll get drawn out by the filter. but the filter's already in a state of, I don't remember the last time I changed it or did any work to it. So usually by the time the filter's gotten to that point, it really, you know, for me anyway, I'm pretty forgetful. So by the time I'm getting to the point where I'm realizing it's been a while, it's usually been a good while. So, ooh, just knocked some eggs off of the glass up here. I don't think these are viable eggs. They've probably been in there since that other batch. Got a little snail right here. This is a live one. Go ahead and throw him in my native tank and see what happens to him. He landed right side up, right on the piece of wood that's covered in algae, so he's going to be right at home unless something gets in there and eats him. I'm honestly not sure. I haven't really given much thought to putting some of these mystery snails in my native tank, whether or not anything would eat them. The crayfish might, I suppose. But I don't have any loaches in there. The Chinese algae eater's not really going to go after snails. So that'll be interesting. Let's see if that one survives. And if it does, maybe I can add some more mystery snails to my native tank. It's getting less and less native as time goes on, but that's okay. As I've said many times over the years, I don't really care about the whole, you know, exact biotope or being super specific about it. If I've got some non-native fish in there, that's fine. I don't care. It's there more to represent, you know, what I would feel is similar to my outdoor experience around here. It's not meant to recapitulate it exactly. It's just meant to give me the feel of my outdoor experience, and it does exactly that. I'm going to call that good for wiping the glass down. My arm's getting tired. Got some dead leaves and stuff floating in the back here. Quite a few dead snail shells. I wonder what's up with all these snails dying. Alright, I think I'm going to call that good, and we will go ahead and reverse flow and get the water flowing again. Start filling it back up. We'll be right back. Alright, we've got the water refilling, and I will take a moment to remind you that I have well water, so I'm not using water that's got chlorine or anything like that in it. I'm fully aware of what my water consists of, its hardness, what's in it, so on and so forth. So simply reversing the flow and turning the water back on from my tap directly back into my tank is not hurting my fish. I'm not putting them at risk of shocking them by any sudden changes. Now, having said that, I probably am giving them a pretty significant reduction in nitrates and total dissolved solids in the water. I'm sure the water in this tank would produce a bright red vial if we were to do a nitrate test on it. In fact, I took a moment to take a water sample before I, started refilling the tank. So in a minute, I'll go over and start a test running, and we'll get an idea, we'll get a look at how red the water is before. I'm sure if we do a test afterwards, it's still going to be bright red. Just, this is a heavily stocked tanks, all my tanks are. And I actually want to talk about that a little bit too. I think I'm going to do a video upcoming here in the future. At least I've been thinking about doing one for a while. I don't know if you follow along with me. That doesn't necessarily mean anything. I plan on doing a lot of videos that never turn out. At any rate, I want to do a video that talks more about how stability is far more important to your tank and your fish's health than perfection. I've touched on this before, and I've talked about, you know, chasing perfection and how, you know, whether it's with your pH or your water hardness or the temperature, stability is far more a factor than bouncing stuff around all the time. So in this case, with this tank being a lot of nitrates in it, if I were chasing that, you know, yellow vial with almost no nitrates in it, as many people do, I used to do this, you know, I used to do water changes after water changes, even if I were to get my, you know, it took me a while to realize I actually have nitrates in my groundwater, but that notwithstanding, if I were to really try to keep the nitrates in this tank down, and I was using my water now that I'm treating it for nitrates and I don't have any nitrates in the water now, I would have to do a water change about the size we just saw there. I'd have to do that every few days, and I don't do that. And I used to try and I'd do these massive water changes, and I didn't really fully understand what I was doing with my water. I didn't understand what was in my water, and so I did more damage to my fish and had more blooms and issues with getting my tank cycled in properly. You know, and it was because I was bouncing the water around so much. Sometimes my water system would be doing one thing, sometimes it would be doing another, depending on when the last time I refilled the salt or when the last time it backwashed. And I was bouncing the pH around, I was bouncing the water hardness around, and I didn't know any of that. I didn't know what I was doing. I was just under the impression that, you know, lots of frequent water changes is always a good thing. You know, more fresh water is always better, and that's not necessarily the case. I found over time that leaving the tank alone in a lot of cases is better for your fish than messing with it. And if it's a case of where you're chasing perfection, where you're constantly tinkering with it, you know, you're adding pH down, then you got to add pH up, then the water's too hard, then you got to put too much softened stuff in. You just stop doing that. You're going to kill your fish. Your tank's never going to stabilize. Your plants are never going to look good. You're gonna run yourself in circles, and you're gonna run yourself ragged. You're never going to have a stable, attractive tank if you're chasing numbers like that. It doesn't work. I've never seen it work. And, you know, I'd rather have a tank that's got 80 parts per million nitrates that I do a water change every 3 weeks or something. I mean, you're basically looking at that scenario right now. And I don't have issues with the tank. This tank has a black ghost knifefish in it. It's been in there for years and years. I've had that fish in this tank for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years now, and I know they live a lot longer than that, but it's still in there, still doing fine. In fact, I can actually see its tail moving in the cave over here, so if you see a little bit of movement, or maybe it'll dart around or something, you might get a glimpse of it. So I'm actually going to go ahead and start that nitrate test while this is finishing off. I want to go ahead and do that before it gets any further, but keep in mind that I do know what I'm doing with my water here. I'm not just turning, you know, tap water back on and loading my tank up with chlorine and all that kind of stuff. So give me a minute and I'll be right back. Give you a good idea how off balance my tank is. I always say I'm not particularly handy at building stuff. If your idea of half a bubble off is good enough, then I'm your man, and that is exactly what I'm talking about. If that's not a perfect example of half a bubble off, I don't know what is. That's almost like a full bubble off though. That's way off. At any rate, I got to shake this bottle to death. The second bottle of the API nitrate kit really does seriously need to be vigorously shaken before you do the test. It's got a suspended solid in it. It's not dissolved into the solution, it's just suspended in it. Think of sand in water, and you need to mix it up really well so that it stays suspended in the water while you're dripping your drips. And when you set that bottle down, that stuff settles back down to the bottom really quickly. So even if you've waited a few minutes and you've tested one tank and you're now testing the next one, shake that second nitrate bottle vigorously again a second time, and before you do your test, you always want to just shake it to death. So give me a minute and I'll be right back. Was anybody waiting for the water to start flowing over the top, thinking I'd forgotten to go in the other room and turn it off? Because I didn't. So I've got the test blooming now, so it takes 5 minutes for the test to fully mature. We don't really need to wait that long. By the time I get this hose put away and the filter turned back on and whatnot, we'll see what it looks like. Well, I can tell you it's already crimson, as I suspected it would be. I bet, again, we could take a test of what it looks like now after the water change, and it'll turn out crimson. Well, unfortunately, I drew too much water, or too much air into it, and we're not getting any circulation, so I'm going to have to pump the filter for a moment. Or maybe not. I think it might be trying to go. Now, I just saw some little tiny squiggly white worms right here in the middle. It's those weird ones that look like little sperms. They don't look like the okay, we got water flow again. I'm just going to rock it gently. That should knock any bubbles loose. So I don't know what those worms are. But I've had them in other tanks and I'm not worried about them. This tank's just been neglected for a little while. So I know that's not the proper way to test this color and look at it, but you should be able to get an idea of looking at that through the tank there of how red that is. So that was the before, and I'm sure if we did the after, you wouldn't be able to really tell a difference just because of the way, once you get beyond about 40 parts per million, it's just red and it gets redder, and it's just dark red. That's all I know. So this could be 80 parts per million. It could be 100 parts per million. I don't know. But we did a water change. We're down to probably under 100 parts per million with the nitrates at this point. And as long as it's under 100 parts per million nitrates, you know, ideally I'd like it maybe under 60. But as long as it's under 100, I'm not sweating it. These fish will be fine. I've said it many, many times before. I know it's a little bit controversial. I'm like the one guy that says not to worry too much about nitrates because they don't really bother your fish all that much, and they don't. So I got one last thing and the water change will be complete. And of course all that debris and stuff is going to swirl around for quite a while. So this is the tank I always talk about that was one of the first ones I really sort of sat down and thought about when I set it up. And while I thought about how awesome it would look, I did not think about water flow and, you know, dead zones and things like that. So this tank is one of my dirtier tanks. I probably should do more maintenance on this tank, but I don't know, it's just one of those tanks that just sits here and turns over. I just never really have issues with it. I just do some maintenance on it from time to time, and it just looks awesome. So there you go, everybody. I'm going to call that the end of the video. That was another uninterrupted complete water change sans filter, and I guess we'll just probably wind up going around and make a whole series out of this. We'll do, you know, all the different tanks I've got down here in the fish room. So go ahead and subscribe. That way you won't miss anything if you enjoyed that one. You know, like I said, make sure you subscribe. That way you won't miss anything else. Don't forget, this one is my Black Ghost Knife Fish tank. I'll see you real soon in the next one. Thanks again.